you can't sit there and say like Colombian coffee
Yes.
works like this. That would be insane because it's
Yeah.
just so diverse. Like you can go with even within Huila, you can go 3 hours one direction and it can
Mm.
be a totally different way that the market works. They go from selling only in parchment to like a variety of like specialty buyers and co-ops to selling completely depulped coffee to people who come through the mountains similar to Central America. Like so it really varies. And I think the most humbling thing about going to Origin and finding the truth is that like you don't know what's around the corner ever. You need to ask the question and find out. And even when you do, it's going to be really challenging because there isn't a like cohesive
Mm.
set of knowledge about this, right?
The Middle East is the origin of brewed coffee, and now it's also home to one of the world's most dynamic and misunderstood coffee markets. At Map It Forward, we're proud to launch the new direction for the Map It Forward Middle East podcast. New conversations in English exploring the businesses, people, and ideas shaping the future of coffee in the Middle East. You'll hear from values-driven founders, supply chain innovators, and entrepreneurs doing things differently, all with one goal in mind: conspiring to each other's success. Whether you're based in the Middle East or exploring how to bring your business to the region, this podcast offers real conversations that go beyond the headlines. Subscribe now by searching Map It Forward Middle East wherever you get your podcasts. Check the show notes for details. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and this is episode 4 of an awesome 5-part series with Brendan Adams from Semilla Coffee in Canada. We are talking about, can we actually make coffee better? And in this episode, we're talking about who holds the truth about origin. I am constantly shocked, Brendan, about the number of people who tell me that they asked a producer for this coffee and this varietal and this processing method and this.
Mm.
And when I say to them, oh, when was the last time you visited them? Then their response is, I've never been to Origin.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a complicated thing. I think now with like WhatsApp and social media, it's really easy to DM somebody and get
And
information.
give
And
them orders,
I think it's
tell them
tricky.
what to do.
Yeah, give them orders, tell them what you want. Yeah, exactly. I placed an order for this one bag. Please get it to me. I mean, that's, to what we talked about already, like this infrastructure
Mm.
privilege, the way in which like the specialty system has evolved is kind of mental when I find out that like people are air freighting a 30-kilo box to their, 1 kilo roaster in their apartment somewhere. I'm just like, holy shit. Like, what is the point
Yeah.
of this? Like, what are we doing? It's just like, from the perspective of like not disregarding the fact that you're trying to run a business and have high quality coffee. It's not that. It's just like, what
Yeah.
an absurd amount of work to achieve that. And the fact that it's sort of evolved to that really indicates that power imbalance that we've been talking about, right? And how who
Mm.
who really is running the show, really, or making the calls. I think, yeah, Origin is super interesting. I think that there's a lot of people. I've heard a lot of different, reasons from people. One thing I think about not being at Origin, and I think one of the things that I would touch on here that I think is very fascinating, is that I do think that within social media and sort of like the climate that we have now around like influencers in social media and coffee, I've seen a lot of these narratives of like, oh, like Origin trips are so stupid. Like you just show up and take a photo and like get free food and like you ask for people to do all this work for you, and or origin trips are terrible for the climate, and so you shouldn't fly around the world to go and meet people. And like there are contexts in which I understand this. You know what I mean? Yes, for sure. There are origin trips where like you will go work with like a crappy importer or exporter who like is exploiting someone, and they'll take
Mm.
you off to some farm and parade you around, and this person doesn't get paid properly, and it's a bad experience. That can happen. But I have never met a producer who isn't thrilled about the notion that a buyer would take the time to fly around the world to come to their small town on their small farm on the side of a mountain and say, "What's up? Show me around."
Mm.
And obviously we need to be respectful in this scenario, but it's like the notion that that doesn't hold value to a small producer, especially, is like just reflects to me that no one's actually asked any of those people what they think about it. And I think that like it's the only way, unfortunately, whether it does have these problems with like I don't want to fly all the time either. I just
Mhm.
hate flying in general. It's become just like an
Yeah,
animalistic
I
ritual at
agree.
this point. But it's like the reality is, like I said in the last episode, like this is where you learn. This is where you'll get the real uncut truth. And like, yeah, you can get a DM from somebody on Instagram and you can DM someone on WhatsApp and chat, but like, it's not how we build real relationships. Similar to our conversation before, like I know we all live super digitally and many of us have never met in person and so we can chat and whatever, but like that relationship is the most key relationship when you're buying the coffee. Like you can only know me via email when you want to buy coffee from me. You know what I mean? But like if I were to only know the people we work with via WhatsApp, that would
Mhm.
be insane. And so it's like a premise that we have in Semilla is that like we only work with people we know. And like that's pretty simple again. It just means that like if a new person enters a project, we might take their coffee the first year, but after that we won't buy from them again until someone in the team has visited them personally, had breakfast, had lunch, had a coffee, ask them what they're doing, explain what we're doing, and get a vibe on like how that's working for them. And so I think sadly, it may be like a high barrier for people in the sense that like, oh, you're busy, it's hard to get away, it's hard to fly, all this kind of stuff. I get that. But at the same time, I think about all the things that we're willing to spend money on and all the time we're willing to take to do other things, and then justify that as like not a priority. When it's like fundamentally, it's not just about the relationship, it's about the fact that if you want the real experience, whether that's just like the truth about origin from like now you stood in a farm and you looked around and you understood what processing was or what picking was, that is a truth in itself that everybody should know who roasts coffee. But secondarily, like you can actually ask somebody who lives that whose family has probably lived generations, how is this experience for you? How is this working out for you? What would you want differently? What is the reality of what you face on a day-to-day basis? And without that information, you're going to be faced with a series of different filterings of that information from different people with more power and wealth that want to fundamentally capture that market for themselves in order to survive. Like that's just the truth and the reality about it. Like it's we just have to come to terms to that,
Yeah, and going to Origin changes you forever. As a coffee professional, it changes you forever. I remember, I've only been to a couple of
Hmm.
Origins, but I remember going to India and going into, shout out to South India Coffee Co. I remember going into their, because they do agroforestry, and they had told me that the day before an elephant, a family of elephants had walked through that farm, through that forest. And there's just something so fucking
Crazy.
cool about that. And knowing that that is something that they have to deal with, because when a family of elephants walks through your coffee, you're going to lose a part of your yield, and that's going to impact the running of your business.
Hmm.
Or if there's a tiger that's
Yeah.
always kind of circling, that's a real reality that these farmers have to deal with. But another one that most people, like, well, let's not go as extreme as India. A lot of people buy from places like Brazil and from Colombia. And folks, the things that you might not know is how dangerous some of these countries are, especially in a year like 2025.
Hmm.
I often hear
Right.
people say, "Oh my God, Lee, I had no idea that we had to get security when we were in Colombia." Well, this
Mm.
is the people who you're going to visit, this is their everyday life. And they probably don't have security, but they got
Hmm.
security for you so that you can make sure that, right?
100% they did. Oh yes.
And this is an expense that you
Yeah.
didn't know that is going to come out of their pocket. And that's
Hmm.
called hospitality.
Yeah.
This is this
Hmm.
is a truth
Hospitality that we would probably never give back their way.
unless you came to the Middle East.
Uh,
We are all about
that's true.
hospitality over here. So come here.
I don't I only speak for
Well,
Canadians.
I tell you, you're not going to get that in America either. You're going to get different kinds of guns in America. I say that
Yeah.
as someone that lived there for most of 15 years. But what are some of the truths
Hmm.
about origin that most people would not know?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, again, I think it's really important to frame that in the sense of like not being super
Hmm.
general in saying like I know everything about everything.
Right.
That's like a huge caveat that I always try to say. But in the specific places that I work, I think what the biggest truth is that each area, even within a country, has its own way of being, right? Like it's all totally separate. So I think that's a
Hmm.
really huge truth in itself. Like when you look at Colombia, I had this conversation within our team the other day. Like you can't sit there and say like Colombian coffee
Yes.
works like this. That would be insane because it's
Yeah.
just so diverse. Like you can go with even within Huila, you can go 3 hours one direction and it can
Mm.
be a totally different way that the market works. You know, they go from selling only in parchment to like a variety of like specialty buyers and co-ops to selling completely depulped coffee to people who come through the mountains, similar to Central America. You know, like so it really varies, and I think the most humbling thing about going to Origin and finding the truth is that like you don't know what's around the corner ever. You need to ask the question and find out. And even when you do, it's going to be really challenging because there isn't a like cohesive
Mm.
set of knowledge about this, right? I think that it's one of those kind of things that we always find really funny when we're traveling, and we always joke about is how like truth is super elusive. You know, even when it comes down to things like in Honduras, when you try to ask someone like, "What's the weight that you sell coffee in?" You can't even get people to agree on like what's a carga versus what's a quintal
Ah.
versus what's a because it's just been sort of like done in this sort of conventional way where no one really knows and no one ever gave them a no one ever said like this is how you sell it and this is the way that it is and you weigh it like this because it's fundamentally being manipulated, it's being like changed, it's being affected, and it varies where you go, right? So I think that even just basic units, like things that we would take as just like given things, like I bought it at X price per pound, so tell me how much it costs per pound. It's like no, Mexico's the same thing. A quintal in Oaxaca is a different weight than a quintal in Veracruz. Why? Nobody knows. Like it just
The sea
is.
market's
Like they still
correcting
call
all
it a
of that.
quintal, but you have to know that it's like 56 kilos. So it's like the reality is like I think the big thing, the truth is like
Yeah.
local economics, and I think that's a big one. Is recognizing the aggregated value that a producer gets, even in a specialty context, is can be very small, but even when you get like a special, even when you're, especially when you're doing conventional, right? And you go and you see like conventional buying points and what people are paying, like it's always just kind of stunning when you go and look. It's, in peak season this year in Veracruz, you're going by the ecom buying points for cherry. And people are lined up in trucks that are going to this processing plant that's like, it could be like a meat packing plant, It's just like something that far outweighs any idea that you have of a quaint little
Right.
beneficio where coffee is turned into like the exportable product. It's a factory. Like it's billowing black smoke into the sky. You've got like hundreds of intermediaries with trucks full of like moldy
Wow.
dairy, and the price they're paying, 18 pesos a kilo, and that's a good price. That's like a peak price. And so that's $1 US,
Wow.
like under $1 US a kilo cherry, right? And obviously, when you look at that and you do the rendimiento and you get the yield to five, you end up at a scenario of like, $5 a kilo theoretically, right? But the producer doesn't get
Mm.
$5 a kilo; they get $1 a kilo. And who steps on the scale and who buys and when does the price change, right? So there's a lot of these different interactions that like I think many of us from the outside just assume like tell me the FOB price. The amount of manipulations and changes and effects that can happen from the farm level to the FOB is
Mm.
monstrous. It's huge. We haven't even touched on what happens when you dry mill coffee. Like how much does it cost to dry mill a coffee? How much does it cost to process it? What is the yield when the coffee's not clean? Et cetera, et cetera. Right. So I think that that's like a big fundamental thing is really crucial about origin is understanding the supply side economics that I would say that almost nobody in the specialty industry has a really good handle on because they don't have a
Mm.
close connection to that day-to-day stuff and that day-to-day experience. Beyond that, I think then tying to that, it's like how do those actors truly work, right? And so I think this is to what we talked about before about this notion of like where does even your specialty coffee really come from? And so I think that this is a big thing I really impress on people a lot is like if traceability matters to you, it should be really important that you understand how much a 5 hectare farm can produce. Because if you see a producer with 5 containers of coffee equivalent or something like this, and they came all from 5 hectare farm, that math doesn't math. And so that's okay if you're okay with that, but then fundamentally you have to acknowledge that, that's not the coffee that it says it is. It can't be. Or maybe if it is, it's a fraction of it, or at the very least, you don't know. Right. And so your traceability and transparency efforts are not traceability and transparency efforts. And then you have to ask yourself, well, how do I get the access to that information? that becomes a really tricky scenario because fundamentally there isn't going to be a database or something you can objectively go and check to see what did that farm gate price to that producer get for that cherry. You're just going to have to take it on good
Mm.
faith that that person bought that at that price if they tell you that, right? Um, and I think that's a really troubling thing that I think we need to take really seriously. And it is part of the power and consolidation that we're talking about. Like look at the Federation right now in Colombia. The Federation is now launching and has been, but is now really pushing their
Oh,
cherry.
yeah.
This is like an unheard of thing in Colombia. Like a decade ago, never. You would never do that. And producers we work with are upset. They do not like that because that's fundamentally taking away their heritage. It's stripping them their economy. It's putting them in a place, what we just talked about at the beginning, a peripheral place. It's holding you forever in a place where you're completely dependent on whatever price gets paid to whoever wants to give you that price at whatever time they want to give you that price. You have no ability to change your future that way at all. Zero. How could you? Because no buyer is buying cherry from you who isn't some vertically integrated massive company or the Federation. But the Federation is selling that as, oh, this is great for you. You're going to have more time for your family. You don't have to do as much work, and the price is the same because we're going to pay you the same. We're going to and theoretically it is. You're going to get like the same amount because they'll do the yield factor and they'll figure it out. And it is the same theoretically as conventional coffee sale, which is probably not a great price, but it's okay this year. But at the end of the day, this goes so much further into understanding like the truth again. What does
Mm.
the producer want? Does the president of the federation and the person who sells you really expensive coffee that they bought from some other producer and like did a process on and sell it to you, did that person decide what that producer wanted or did that producer decide what they wanted? And so the truth has to come individually, as difficult as it is, from the mouths of each person you work with. And that's a really complicated process at scale. I understand that. But like I don't know another way around it until we get into this super direct democracy standard of like, is this how you want to do it or not? And if they say, I'm super happy to sell in cherry to the Federation because I agree it's going to give me more time and I don't have to build infrastructure and whatever, there are people who think that way and go for it. But there are a lot of people who do not feel that way. And I think this ties to like one other thing that I'd say to end my
Go ahead.
rant is this other sort of truth about origin thing that I'm hearing a lot is this notion right now that with the spike in conventional coffee, um, that now nobody wants to do specialty. That conventional coffee has become so high priced, selling on the commercial market is so high priced that everybody's abandoning specialty coffee. And we talked about this a little bit. Yes, it is happening to a certain extent. There are people that are doing that. But this also under, like undervalues or undermines the notion that there are people just like you and I who are producing coffee, that the price isn't what matters. It does because they have to pay their bills, but what matters is the inheritance they have, their heritage as coffee growers, what they've done their whole lives, and their passion to do something that they care about that's
Mm.
connected to the land. And that will never go away. Those people, like, it may go away because, like, literally they can't grow coffee anymore on their land, or because someone dispossesses the bank dispossesses their land because they can't pay back their bank fines. Like, that's totally possible. But in terms of their own willingness to say, like, I'm walking away from this now because I don't care about this anymore, there's a lot of people out there that we work with that would never do that because fundamentally they care a lot about making this matter for them. And so I think that all of these things, though, you don't know that unless you speak to a smallholder and say, like, how do you feel about it? And I think one of the biggest things that we have to be careful about is like this standard in which we're constantly um, putting ourselves in a position of deciding that we know the truth because we're making assumptions on like
Mm.
market trends or things that we regurgitate through the internet or whatever it is. I think that's a really troubling tendency that we have to be careful with.
So many questions I want to ask you, but they actually belong in the next episode because in the next episode is
Okay.
the question we're asking is the future of coffee guaranteed? Join us for that. That's going to be juicy.
Mm.
Peace, love, and peanut butter. Have an amazing rest of your day. This episode is part of a 5-part series produced by Mapper Forward. Check the full playlist and guest details in the show notes, as well as how you can support our work in the coffee industry. Become a premium YouTube subscriber, explore our Patreon and any brands we've partnered with to bring you this podcast. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It really does help us grow our audience.